Joe Scarborough. Welcome to the Realignment.
Thank you so much, Marshall. It's great to be here. Really appreciate it.
Good to see you, Joe. Let's just start here. These books about any sort of president, when they come out after an election, they're usually making a statement about the moment. After the 2012 election, you had a book that came out about Ike, Reagan, the Republican Party's evolution during the second half of the 20th century. Deeply researched.
Nobody listened to that shit. If they had, we wouldn't have gone in the direction that they went in. I wrote 3 books trying to tell Republicans not to lose their, can I swear here?
Yes, please.
Not to lose their shit. And they never listened. But if you go back and you read the book that I wrote in 13, the book I wrote in 9, the book I wrote in 04, it was all just begging my party to keep it, to stay conservative. I'm a small government conservative, but to be conservative with a small c. And I finally gave up and just started writing about Democrats.
So that you just led me into my question, which is Harry Truman. Why Harry Truman 2020?
You know, it's interesting. The timing was great. I had no idea when I started writing the book. I had actually written a book about Trump because I'd known Trump for 12, 13 years. Went through about 4 or 5 drafts, and I finally decided after the 14th book on Trump dropped. I said, I'm not going to get into that sort of crowd. So I decided I was going to, because I got so tired about talking about Donald Trump for 3 hours a day and writing about him for a year. I said, I'm going to write about some presidents that I loved that inspired me to get involved in politics. And I got elected to Congress in 94, which, 8,000 years ago. And when I went in, I was considered this right-wing, small government, libertarian populist. And people would come to my office and see 2 pictures. One would be of Ronald Reagan. That would surprise nobody. But the other one was of Harry Truman. And they asked me why I had Truman. There were a lot of different reasons why. Another one of my heroes in high school was Harry Truman, along with Bobby Kennedy as well. Both of them sort of said it like it was. Both of them had no problem going against the orthodoxies of their day, even the orthodoxies of their own political parties. But with Truman, I love the fact that he came from a humble background. Maybe it's a populist in me, the state school guy in me. I love that he came from a humble background and ended up changing the world in a way that led Winston Churchill to saying, of all men, no one has done more to save Western civilization than Harry Truman. What he did over the course of 2 or 3 years following World War II forever changed our world, created a stage, an international stage that helped launch the American century, alleviated, I think, an unprecedented refugee crisis across Europe, and helped rebuild Europe.
Joe, contextualize that a little bit, because you kind of put Truman so far in that pantheon of presidents where not a lot of people would necessarily put it. I mean, you've got Washington's farewell, Monroe Doctrine, World War I, and then Truman. Not like a demarcation point that we might traditionally think of. Why do you put him that way? Because I tend to agree with you, but I think he deserves the credit due. Why do you think it's been so long that we're only just recognizing that?
Well, so unfortunately, I'm going to repeat a joke that I can no longer repeat around my children when I'm explaining things, because they've heard it so much. So now you have to feel their pain. I always loved a little joke where an old fish is swimming past 2 young fish, and the old fish goes, "Nice water today." The young fish say, "What's water?" Right. And it's not really a funny joke, sure, but it does make a great statement that we are often not aware of what we're surrounded by. We're not often aware of our own environment. We're often not aware, in this case, of the foreign policy world that we inherited from Harry Truman. It took Donald Trump and the Trump presidency for us to understand exactly what we were missing. And with Harry Truman, you have a guy who had a lot of failings, but at the same time, on the international stage, he really did create the world that we lived in. He in 47, he knew that he had to work with Republicans and Democrats alike and move the country away from the isolationism and peacetime that they'd been in since Washington's farewell address. Passed the Truman Doctrine, which pushed Stalin and the Soviet Union back into Eastern Europe and stopped them from moving forward into Central and Western Europe. Passed the Marshall Plan, which again alleviated historic refugee crisis and helped rebuild Europe, and then passed NATO. And in so doing, really promoted Western-style democracies and promoted the sort of democracies that we've seen actually on the decline over the past 4 years, whether you look at what Donald Trump's done, or whether you go to look at what's happening in Hungary, what's happening in Poland, what's happening across the world. So I think most historians, even though Truman left with a 22% approval rating and was considered a failure of a president when he left, I think most historians would say, and most foreign policy analysts would say, that he was a great or a near great president on the foreign policy stage and the most influential since World War II.
Yeah.
So here's the question, and we're not interested in doing a relitigating Donald Trump show. I don't think anyone wants to hear that nor do it. But for the quick one point where it's relevant, you're referencing over the past 4 years, this went away. Did it go away because Trump was this aberration that was separate from American traditions, or had the edifice that Truman put together along with George C. Marshall, bipartisan set of foreign policy elites moving forward, did it go away because that foundation has started to rot after the Cold War? How do you think about that?
You make a great point in that I don't know that I would say it has begun to rot. It started to rot under Trump. But I do think if you talk to most foreign policy analysts, serious foreign policy analysts, they would say the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, NATO were all extraordinarily important from 1947 to December 25th, 1991, when the Soviet Union fell. And they've continued to be relevant, but I don't think there's any doubt. Point that your question actually makes a great point, that yes, that's worked for the past 75 years, but we need to update those institutions. We need to make them more relevant as far as NATO goes. I will say that though it pains me to say this, I do think Donald Trump, even though he has no idea what the 2% pertains to as far as defense budgets go, I do think Donald Trump's asking a question that a lot of Americans have been asking.
Can you clarify the 2% point? Because you're referencing NATO.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Sorry, there's everyday people who listen, so we have to.
No. I just say Donald Trump would always go, they all promised to pay 2% for their defense budgets, and I've got them to repay more money. And like there was this big NATO pot. No, it's just a requirement that if you're in NATO, that you spend 2% of your annual budget on defense. And there are some countries that have not done that. And so I think a lot of Americans 75 years after, 79 years now after Pearl Harbor, are saying to themselves, well, wait, should we really carry the load for all of Europe? Should we carry the load for Japan? And I agree we shouldn't carry it as much as we have over the past 75 years or so, which goes to your point. We need to get the Europeans and Japan and South Korea and other allies is as engaged as we can. So I do think it would have been good for us to have a president who actually understood foreign policy and diplomacy and could have carried it to its logical end. But I'm hoping that the Biden administration will continue to keep pressure on our allies to contribute to the cause of defense.
And what you're just saying brings up something I noted at the start, where you described yourself as a populist, humble roots. I'm a fellow state school grad here too, so I identify with that to a certain degree. there's a contradiction here. Foreign policy, especially the foreign policy history that you're telling, is incredibly elite driven. All of these guys, even Robert A. Taft, who is the not populist, but he's sort of the more isolationist adjacent one. He's the one who's making these Trumpian-like arguments in the 50s as a sort of rebuttal to this. It's an elite project, right? He was the son of a president, top of his school, top of his class at Harvard, all those sorts of things. How do you as a person, like, firstly, define your populism? That's just interesting to hear, because if you're a listener, you're thinking, wait, Joe, you're at MSNBC. Like, what kind of populist is that, right? How does that work? And then how do you think about the way that foreign policy is the opposite of any form of humble, sort of salt of the earth driven place?
Well, as far as my populism goes, perhaps I've become a little less populist than I was in 1995 when I was carrying around a torch and screaming, the streets will flow with the blood of the unbelievers. I'm not doing that anymore. But I am at the same time that I'm skeptical of the federal government becoming too involved in our lives. I also am extraordinarily skeptical of the Wall Street Journal editorial page and CEOs and hedge fund managers just talking about unfettered free trade, no matter what. I believe in free trade generally, just like I believe in smaller government generally. But obviously, there are times when the federal government needs to get involved. There are times when the federal government needs to get aggressively involved. And there are times when we need to pull back from trade deals and make sure they're negotiated in a way that don't damage working class Americans' lives, don't hurt union members as much as I think they have in the past. Now, that said, I still support, I think it was a mistake that we didn't move forward with TPP, because I think that would have been a bold strategic move. It would have helped us in our competition with China. But at the same time, I think it's a question of just negotiating in a tough way. I also think, too, and this is a mistake that I made in Congress, one of the many mistakes I made in Congress. I would talk to small business owners. They would complain about regulations. They would complain, there'd be one guy that had two workers, and he would spend 3 days of his week dealing with federal and state and local regulations, OSHA regulations, environmental regulations in Florida, the DEP, whatever. And I really felt for him. And I think a lot of us that got up there were like saying, hey, we got to cut regulations. We got to cut regulations. Well, some of those regulations we cut it was like a one size fit all approach. And we cut regulations for Wall Street.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're like, wait. So these banks are saying that federal government should be telling them what they can and what they can't do. And it was a one size fit all approach. And I think it was a devastating. It led to the financial collapse of 2008. And so I am not a Wall Street Journal editorial page conservative. I don't think I ever have been. I don't think what's good for Wall Street is good for America. I don't believe that if the less taxes billionaires and multimillionaires pay, the better off it is for Americans. I agree with Warren Buffett. That you take, like, for instance, the capital gains tax. It doesn't have to be down, to 0 or 10% or 12%. People are going to still make investments even if they're taxed on those investments. So I may not have answered your question very well.
No,
I don't blindly. Listen, I'm a small government, free market, free enterprise guy, but I don't trust this Congress. I didn't trust Trump, and I wouldn't trust anybody in Washington to just blindly cut taxes and blindly cut regulations like my party has been doing over the past 25 years, because it leads to gross inequities that actually threatens American capitalism. And I am an American capitalist, but what we have done over the past quarter century has damaged capitalism and has undermined people's confidence in American capitalism because the income disparity is so grotesque.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of disagreement here, Joe. The real question, though, is in this system that you're talking about, the post-Cold War era, because that's where this actually becomes most important. A lot of these underlying assumptions around the Cold War get transferred into really the era where you came up, 94, right? PNTR with China, permanent normal trade relations, NAFTA, many of these other trade deals, TPP, like you mentioned there, at the tail end of kind of that at least era where people were singing this song as one of unfettered good, and if you questioned it, you were kind of a quack. That is where I think everything kind of went wrong. And where I have said here is it's like, I'm not against elites. It's just I think we have a bad elite with bad assumptions that have gotten us now in the post-World War era, Iraq, Afghanistan, many of these trade deals, exacerbating the inequality and the inequities that you described there. How do you reckon with that, right? Which is that how do you reckon with that era where I think things really did go off the rails? And a lot of the assumptions that were so baked into our politics, our elites, and our daily life became utterly and totally disconnected to the point where a man named Donald Trump was able to, ascend to the presidency by pointing them out.
So I'm writing down a list right now, and this is one of my favorite exercises, just to talk about the failure of elites. And I was a populist before this, but so let's just talk about this century.
Yeah.
Because you all are so young and so good looking. If you ever should see how young and good looking you are, you won't remember this. But at the turn of the century in 2000, the United States was in an extraordinary position. We were, talk about peace and prosperity. We were, I think, probably at the height of American influence across the globe without any real challengers. And then in 2001, we had 9/11. In 2002, we had WorldCom, MCI, and Enron. In 2003, we had weapons of mass destruction. In 2004 or 5, we had Katrina. In 2006, we had the Iraq War and sectarian violence, tearing Iraq to shreds. In 2008, we had the Wall Street meltdown. And you can just go down the list and you can continue that list. And I think there has been a failure of Washington elites, and what I'm about to say will ensure that everybody will be angry at me. So I'm going to go ahead and say it. Whether you loved George W. Bush or hated George W. Bush, whether you loved Barack Obama or hated Barack Obama, whether you loved Donald Trump or hated Donald Trump, I can tell you these three gentlemen shared one thing in common. They didn't understand Washington. They didn't really like being in Washington.
Very true.
Right. And all of them would prefer to have watched ESPN most of the day to actually being president of the United States. And I understand that, yes, and I've said Barack Obama is one of the most important presidents, not only in our lifetime, but as far as the advancement of civil rights in America, I see the Emancipation Proclamation, Martin Luther King in 1963, and the election of Barack Obama. And you know what I'm going to say now? That said, he was a glorified state senator, right? A glorified state senator that came to Washington. Harry Reid immediately saw him and said, "You don't like it here. Why don't you run for president?" And so he got into the presidency the same way George W. Bush got into the presidency, the same way Donald Trump got into the presidency. Not understanding Capitol Hill, not really liking or respecting the senators that he was working with. And if you don't believe me on Barack Obama, my God, most of the bad stuff I heard about Barack Obama came from senior Democratic senators on Capitol Hill saying, this guy just doesn't understand. This guy's not communicating with us. He's actually collapsed his entire cabinet down to two people, Dennis McDonough and Ben Rhodes. They make all the decisions on foreign policy. The Secretary of State doesn't matter. The National Security Advisor doesn't matter. None of them would matter. Donald Trump, my God, it collapsed down into one person with Donald Trump. And George W. Bush, he was surrounded by people who were supposedly the wise men of Washington, D.C., but he didn't really listen to them. When he was asked why he didn't ever bring Colin Powell into the office to get his advice on whether he should go into Iraq or not, since Colin Powell actually had led the fight in Iraq just a decade earlier, he said, well, I knew where he stood. I knew he was against the war, so there's no need for me to get his opinion. And so there was a lack of understanding that Harry Truman had, that Joe Biden has, that LBJ, for instance.
Exactly.
Look at these three presidents. You've got Joe Biden, who people always look down on because he went to a state school. He wasn't an Ivy League guy, and he talked about that during the campaign. Look at LBJ, who graduated from Southwest Texas Teachers College. And then Harry Truman, who takes the cake on this front, graduated from Spalding Commercial College in Kansas City. And you have these three gentlemen who didn't have the education pedigree that most of official Washington elites would want, but they had the political pedigree. They understood how the Senate worked. So when it hit the fan for Harry Truman, when he was put into the presidency, despite the fact that FDR didn't even tell him about the Manhattan Project, didn't tell him about anything, he knew who to call in the Senate. And he immediately got lined up with Arthur Vandenberg, who had been an avowed isolationist. He was smart enough to understand, this is the guy I have to talk to. And not only did he talk to him during the day, but Walter Isaacson described in The Wise Men, described how at the end of every day, Truman would make his staff get in the car and drive over to Vandenberg's townhouse and brief him on everything they had done all day. This was one of my biggest complaints about Bush and the Iraq War. He could have gotten buy-in. He could have gotten even more buy-in if he had slowed down. But he didn't do it. It's the same thing with Barack Obama and Obamacare. I understand the Republicans were horrific. I understand what Mitch McConnell said. I understand all of that. But And I think a lot of Democrats will disagree with me strongly here, especially my friends who worked in the Obama administration. They said we did everything we could do. But you say, well, okay, so I know Mitch McConnell was a jerk and said he wanted you to fail. What outreach did he do to Mitch McConnell? Well, we invited him over to eat. I said, okay, how many times? One time.
One time, yeah.
One time, and it didn't go well. That's not how Washington works. I don't say this as a critique on Barack Obama. I really don't. I'm just saying we've had three presidents in this century that haven't understood how Washington works. I learned really quickly. I came up as a hothead. I learned very quickly. I would go into the House floor, and you'll never find a picture of me sitting down with Republicans. I'd go on the House floor. I immediately went to the Democratic side. All of my friends, Democrats, all of them. When I come back to Washington, it's Democrat, because I would always go in, I would sit down, I would talk to Democrats. My friendships would be with Democrats, because I knew that's how I was going to get things done. And I also just socially was more relaxed with Democrats than Republicans. But Harry Truman understood it. I think Joe Biden's going to understand it well. I heard time and time again from Republicans that when they needed to get things done during the Obama administration, they'd go to Biden, because Biden understood the horse trading that went on Capitol Hill.
So quick thing, Joe, here. What if there's a problem here, which is that what if Bush, Obama, Trump have a correct intuition, which Washington actually doesn't work, which the system you're referring to with Truman, LBJ, sort of, you're really catching the tail end of this, right? You have people like Tip O'Neill being Speaker of the House, working with Reagan a decade before you came into Congress. that system no longer works, and there's no such thing as understanding DC anymore. And what DC is actually good at is implementing these failed sort of 21st century policies we're talking about. And at the same time, this is where I would sympathize with you, what they're capable, here's a better way of putting this. Obama, Trump, and Bush are capable of diagnosing that DC doesn't work. They're good politicians, so they can make the case and get elected on that, but they can't actually implement what's next. So I guess I want to just challenge the idea that there is such thing as how Washington works in 2020.
Yeah.
Well, it's politics. I mean, this is how things have worked for thousands of years, for several thousand years. Bismarck said politics is the art of the possible. Problem is, when you don't understand how Washington works, when you aren't there, you don't understand that usually a good deal is when both sides go away pissed off. You don't understand that you have to give up a lot to get a lot. And that's something that, again, because these people weren't creatures of Washington, they didn't understand. Let's look at two governors who understood how to make things work in Washington, D.C., one Republican, one Democrat. And they share one thing in common. Ronald Reagan in California as a governor, Bill Clinton in Arkansas as governor. Guess what? Ronald Reagan always had to deal with liberals in California. Had no choice, or else he wouldn't pass legislation. Bill Clinton, poor guy, 12 years, had to deal with Arkansas conservatives and was never going to get anything done unless he figured out how to do that. And both of them figured out how to do it. And I will tell you, Bill Clinton couldn't stand the Republican Congress, did not understand us, didn't get it at all. And we couldn't stand Bill Clinton. But Clinton was smart enough. He knew how to always put us in a corner.
Sure. But Joe, let me challenge.
The great thing about Clinton, though, really quickly, is you
sure.
could impeach him on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, he'd call you up and he'd be like, hey, let's go golfing. Like, what? Because Bill Clinton always understood what these three guys in the 21st century haven't understood. There's always another vote. There's always another time they're going to need you on legislation. And that's why he got a lot of things done with the Republican Congress that did not like him.
Totally. And look, we talk a lot here about those power dynamics, and I completely agree. I can just hear the internal screams of some of our listeners because they're like, yeah, but when they worked together, it was bad, right? It was like, well, Reagan worked with Democrats to like cut taxes and usher in this large explosion of what we have today, which is that, Bill, and this is, our left listeners are like, yeah, Bill Clinton worked with Republicans to like gut welfare. Every time Washington comes together, or for example, what you're putting forward, let's say the Georgia Senate races go the way they do, Biden and Mitch McConnell could like team up in order to pass TPP again. I know you support that, but a lot of people don't.
Right.
It seems really that what you're talking, it sounds almost like you're fetishizing bipartisanship for the sake of it without the ends themselves being considered, right?
No, I mean, a bad bill is a bad bill. I don't want a bad fucking bill passed. And I say that to all of your friends that are listening right now. Right now, there are Americans who are suffering.
Sure.
Because we can't get COVID relief through the United States Senate. The House passed it. The Senate won't pass it. And Mitch McConnell has proven that he operates in bad faith time and time again. So what are we seeing happening? And I'm excited about it. We're seeing Republicans and Democrats alike coming together. And so whether it's on the Republican side, you're going to have Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah, it's Murkowski.
It's going to be working with Joe Manchin. I'm sure Mark Kelly, Kristen Sinema. I think in the new Senate, you'll have Governor Hickenlooper, Senator Hickenlooper. Going to have 6, 7, 8, 9 centrists that are going to get together and help pass legislation that I guarantee you Bernie Sanders will hate on the left and Tom Cotton will hate on the right. Is Bernie going to get everything he wants? No. Or Democrat? No. And Tom Cotton and Ted Cruz and all the people on the right that claim to be small government Republicans, but are actually raging hypocrites who blew out the deficit and the debt more than anybody else. They're all going to be complaining, but I do think there's going to be a middle ground where we can get some good legislation passed.
Yeah, I mean, but again, though, this is kind of my point, which is that, and I've covered this a lot in day out. Okay, that bipartisanship bill is great. It's got corporate liability. It's got no stimulus checks, and it's got a modest increase in unemployment insurance. And that is like half of what Nancy Pelosi could have got. I mean, you said Mitch McConnell doesn't operate in good faith. I don't think really Pelosi does either. She all but admitted it recently. And that's just, to my point is when we have an environment here, stimulus checks are like at 85%, something like that.
Right.
If you go and you look at the polls. And that's just not even within the bipartisan consensus. So it seems to me that the bipartisan consensus on Iraq, on Afghanistan, on economics, and so much more is dramatically out of step with where the people are, right? So when you're saying like Bernie's not going to get what he wants, it sounds a bit flippant. But I mean, Josh Hawley's also not going to get what he wants, right? And yeah, but I'm saying what they want. You have 2 senators who represent 2 out of 98 who are demanding something which is demanded by 80% of the people. And that's where the out-of-step nature of this just seems to be a bit of a problem.
Well, I don't know what to say other than it's.
We don't get Washington to a certain degree.
Well, let me tell you. Yeah. It's just simple math.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Joe Biden, you're either going to have to get to 50 or you're going to have to get to 51. And unfortunately, for a lot of your listeners, I think Republicans have been far more effective in driving hard bargains over the past several years. But, looking ahead, are we going to get over the next 2 years the type of healthcare reform that I would like, that you all would like? I'm afraid not. Because while I am a small government conservative in many respects, I think our healthcare system is an absolute disgrace. And I think we need to actually fix Obamacare and expand upon Obamacare. Mm-hmm. I don't see that happening over the next 2 years unless you have people, unless some Republicans will get on board. Maybe they will. I do think we have a shot at immigration reform, real meaningful immigration reform. I think Republicans have remained silent in a time of moral crisis, not only on the immigration situation, but also on refugee crisis that we've had. So I'm hopeful we can get there. I know the last 6 years of the Obama administration, no meaningful legislation was passed. So President Obama was forced to sign executive orders. Donald Trump didn't give a damn about getting anything passed in a meaningful way. Yeah. So other than his tax cut, which was grotesque, and the amount of money it gave to the richest Americans, you can't even say 1% beyond that. He just signed executive orders. I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can have a consensus on a lot more legislation that can get passed. I'm curious. How do you think Nancy has not operated in good faith?
I know it's a good question. I mean, she was asked recently in that press conference on Friday. We're taping this on Monday just for everybody's awareness. And she was like, "Yeah, I'm open to a smaller bill now that Joe Biden is president-elect." And I'm like, "Well, now the upper bound of what's possible is $900 billion. Previously, it was $1.8 trillion." And look, I mean, maybe McConnell and them shoot it down, maybe. But let it go through. Yeah.
The quick context to give here is that the argument would be that supporting the bad faith, which is that an additional round of stimulus checks, would have helped Trump win re-election.
Which I think is true. Yeah, I think it's 100% true. Trump wins the election if another round of stimulus checks goes through. So if Nancy, look, at the end of the day, she probably made the right political calculation. But I think it was it's a big problem. I'm just looking now today. The average American there's an owed, I think, of $5,000 in back rent and in expenses because, we have an eviction moratorium, but we don't have like a rent moratorium or more. And I look at that and I'm like, this is a profound failure. And look, there's no Mitch McConnell standing going on here, but I just think it's a true bipartisan failure at this point.
It really is, and we're in trouble. There's no doubt. Working Americans are in trouble, and I think we're in trouble as a nation. A lot of things that have been happening over the past 6 to 9 months economically are going to catch up with us in 2021, and the lack of stimulus checks, the lack of COVID relief, I think even if they end up passing something, it's most likely not going to be enough because what's been happening the past 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, it's a disaster.
So let me be the devil's advocate here, not for this specific argument, but just point out something people are no doubt thinking. Joe, you started this episode off by pointing out that you've been writing a lot and thinking about the future of the Republican Party. Obviously, you still have a very important voice a lot of people listen to. Do you think, what's your sort of thought on the future of the Republican Party as we're sort of navigating this weird Trump interregnum where it's not clear whether he's leaving or staying? And then 2, do you think that people are going to listen to what you say, and not just you personally, but sort of the class of people that you represent? And I mean that in the best sense of the term, which is that you are a former Republican office holder, you have a prominent media space. How do you just think about that when you think about the obvious idea of because this is when it's useful when we're talking about the people back home, in the sense of, I'm sure there are plenty of people in Florida who are like, Joe abandoned us. He didn't support Trump, so I'm not going to listen to him about the future, even if we're talking about entirely different things.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, well, for me, it's very simple. I love my job. I get paid well. I get paid more money than I ever thought I'd get paid to say exactly what I think. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm able to criticize both parties. And
why aren't you a politician on TV? I don't understand, Joe.
And I don't care. But I'm worried about the country, and I'm worried about the future of the country. And I'll just lay it out. I hope this Republican Party has no future. I hope it's destroyed. Donald Trump is a racist. He's a bigot. He's a fascist. And my Republican friends, and I can still call them friends, I can have friends that I disagree with politically, but my Republican friends that I used to work with have remained silent through the racism, through the fascism, through the breaching of constitutional norms. I hope they go the way of the Whig Party.
So quick thing on this, Joe.
And I don't think they deserve anything more than a complete and total collapse.
What's fascinating here is that we just saw 2 different Joe Scarboroughs, though.
Yeah.
Because earlier in the episode, you're referencing Robert Carowan, LBJ, hard-nosed Truman, Bill Clinton, golfing one day, getting impeached another day. It's very realistic, right? It's very how DC works. It's not pretty. Right. But then we're talking now about how Republicans should have acted during the Trump era, which the hard-nosed part of us would know that most of the Republican politicians are not popular with the base. You would know that Donald Trump would, I mean, it's even like, look what happened to, how am I forgetting this? Senator from Alabama, who was the
Jeff Sessions.
Look what happened to Jeff Sessions, right? Like Jeff Sessions, who even went Trumpy, yet still at the end of the day was stomped over it. So how do you reconcile what you think is the morally right thing to do with the politically advantageous thing to do?
Well, first of all, if I were in Congress, I would have to deal with people that I disagree with. That's why I told you when I was considered a right-wing nut job, I would go in Congress and I would sit down and all my friends would be Democrats and we would try to find areas that we agreed on. But for me, personally, I have to do what I think is morally right, which I haven't seen a lot of politically. Politically, I haven't seen a lot of Republicans doing that. Listen, you're talking to a guy right now who led a coup against the first Republican speaker to sit in the chair in 40 years because I didn't think he was I didn't think Gingrich was keeping his word on a variety of issues. And so you are right. If I were in the United States Senate and I were a Democrat, I would have to figure out how to work with Republicans. And regardless of how horrifically they acted, just like Democrats in the 1970s, including Joe Biden, had to work with segregationists and past segregationists, whether it was Eastland or whether it was Strom Thurmond or whoever it was. You just, again, you got to get to 51 votes. So you've got to make that calculation and get there any way you can. But I guess because I am a Republican, I was a Republican, I guess I hold my own side to a higher level. And what this Republican Party has proven is what I spent my entire life trying to disprove, that Republicans weren't racists, that Republicans weren't hard-hearted when it came to taking care of poor people, that Republicans weren't anti-immigrant. All of these things, this Republican Party under Donald Trump, have actually proven that every horrible thing that liberals have said about the Republican Party over the past 25 years are true.
And yet, Joe, Donald Trump just got more minority votes second most amount of minority votes than any Republican since 1960. He got, he improved his performance in this party. And when you're talking here, he wanted to go the way of, what I can't remember what you said, but you essentially wanted to go the way of the Whig Party.
I want the party to die. How's
that?
Well,
what if, though, that the party that you talk about from 1990s is dead, has gone the way of the Whigs, and that Trump is the future of the Republican Party? Because, look, you talked about Joe Biden. I mean, he can talk state school all he wants, but if we look at the suburbs, if we look at who exactly is voting, the clearest delineator of votes in the 2020 presidential election was a 4-year college degree, and second to that, largely was wealth. And the Democratic Party, largely embodied kind of by a swing of many folks like yourself, former Republicans, going and voting for Joe Biden. And that's fine, right? Because there's millions of working class Americans. So why would you want that to die? You've just talked here about working class consensus. You've talked here about questioning trade. You've talked here about so much of the mistakes of the elite. I mean, that is what Trump embodied. And if there is a future of the Republican Party, I'd say Trump at his best embodied. And if there is a future for the Republican Party, don't you think it's going to look a lot more like Donald Trump than it is what you're discussing?
Yeah, but this is a party that sat silently by while Donald Trump lied about a pandemic that's going to end up killing about 400,000, 500,000 Americans. This is a Republican Party that remained silent when Donald Trump refused to guarantee a peaceful transfer of power if he lost. This is a Republican Party that remained silent when Donald Trump tried to have arrested his political opponent the last 2 weeks of the campaign. Think about that. He was trying to pressure his attorney general to arrest his political opponent, and Republicans remained silent.
There can be I think this is bad.
Because here's the deal. This isn't about their ideology. This isn't about their issue, where they stand on issues, their engagement in the world. The Republican Party has proven over the past 4 years, and especially in the past 4 weeks, that they have moved to an anti-democracy, a post-democracy party. There can be no compromise with that. I can compromise with Bernie Sanders all fucking day. Bernie, you want students to have all of their loans
Our Bernie people are loving this right now.
Bernie, you want shit that's never going to happen, okay? But let me tell you something. I understand. I think the student loan racket, I think it's a scam. So let's figure out where we meet in the middle, Bernie. And you know what Bernie would say? He'd go, okay, Joe, let's do it. Okay? So we can disagree radically on the way we look at things. And we can still find a middle ground because Bernie knows he's never going to get 51 votes for his socialist democratic view of America. And I know I'm not going to get 51 votes for my worldview from 10, 15 years ago. At this point, I will tell you, my obsession is having Washington work again and having conservatives and Democrats, socialists and libertarians figuring out how to get Washington to work again, not to pass legislation just for the sake of passing legislation, but moving the ball down the field on health care, on student loans, on immigration, on education reform, on all of these issues that matter. And again, I'm not going to be happy with everything. Bernie's not going to be happy with everything. But we could sit down and talk.
Yeah.
Which is something you can't. How do you sit down? How do you find middle ground with a political party that is trying to throw out 150 million votes and disregard an election? They are either anti-democracy or they are post-democracy. I don't know what you call it, but they don't deserve to survive. One other thing I want to say too. You said that Trump got more minority votes than anybody else. Second
to Bush. Yeah.
Okay. But let me say this. First of all, the polls sucked this year.
Yeah.
The exit polls, like, how can we trust the exit polls?
Let's go county by county data then. County by county data, right? So Zapata County. Yeah.
So let's say that Donald Trump really did get 12% of the black vote. Big deal. He lost 88% of the black vote. And let's say he got 33% of the Hispanic votes. Guess what? He lost 67% of the Hispanic vote. And guess what? The demographic changes. This is my pet peeve since the election. I write the demographics is destiny because that's been something I've been arguing for years based on my concerns about entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, everything else. But demographics still is destiny. So Donald Trump got 33% of the Hispanic vote. Guess what? In the state of Texas, there are 9 Hispanic babies being born for every 1 white Caucasian baby. All right. If I don't want Republicans to ever win the White House again, I'm good with getting 67% of the Hispanic vote and 88% of the black vote, because they're never going to win the White House back again with the numbers breaking the way they're breaking over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, to me, it's all about the trend line, right? Which is that if you can increase your Hispanic performance, then 33 today, 40 tomorrow, 50 the next. Who knows? Again, this is all contingent on a bunch of policies, which I'm probably just as black-pilled on the GOP as you are, but for different reasons. But I guess the question I keep coming back to is why is it as morally objectionable to stand by and watch Bush lie about the war in Iraq? Then how is that somehow like codified and fine? And yet, what you're laying about the pandemic and voter fraud, etc., it just seems like rank partisanship all around. Like, that's the part that I can't get my head around, which is that if we're going to go back to a Republican Party that stood by and watched American soldiers get killed in Iraq and didn't speak out for years and years and years, how is that not, frankly, more morally objectionable than what we have right now?
Well, I think if you sit down and you talk to people that knew George W. Bush, that worked with George W. Bush, you could start with Ted Kennedy and others, they would say that though George W. Bush was a fatally flawed president, certainly as it pertained to Iraq, there were other areas where he did extraordinary things. He saved 13 million, 14 million lives.
Yeah, PEPFAR was great.
In Africa with PEPFAR. You could talk about the fact that he was a champion for immigration reform. He was out front on immigration reform, working with Ted Kennedy on immigration reform. He worked with Ted Kennedy on education reform. I mean, he was and I will say, you're talking to somebody here who, as much as I liked George W. Bush personally, I considered him an absolute failure as a president. And it stung me more because I thought he hurt American conservatism. I thought he hurt the Republican Party, and I thought he hurt our country globally. I thought he took a great opportunity on 9/11 and to after the tragedy of 9/11 and people coming together. I thought he took a great opening for us to reach out to not only to our friends and allies, but also to our enemies, and try to basically move this country in a more positive direction. Instead, we went into Iraq, and it was a colossal disaster. But that said, whether you're talking about George W. Bush, whether you're talking about Barack Obama, whether you're talking about even Richard Nixon, talk to people who worked with Richard Nixon. They say the guy genuinely loved this country. He did what he did because he loved this country. He was misguided. He should have ended up in jail. But I don't hear anybody that talks about Donald Trump and suggests that this guy was doing what he was doing because he thought it was in the best interest of this country, misguided or not. So is it worse that the Republican Party, including myself at the beginning, supported going into Iraq because we thought Saddam Hussein probably had weapons of mass destruction and might even still be trying to build nuclear weapons? Do I think that that's as bad as Republicans standing by while Donald Trump is trying to steal an election? No, I don't. I think there's a huge difference. I think there's a huge difference when Donald Trump is calling the press enemies of the people, when Donald Trump is constantly attacked, instead of working with Democrats like Bush did before and after Iraq. I think Trump is in a completely new zone. And I think when people try to compare what Donald Trump's done by questioning the independence of the federal judiciary, by calling the press enemies of the people, by claiming absolute power under Article 2, by hiring people like Stephen Miller, who pushes policies forward to put children in cages. I don't think there's any moral equivalence there. And I think people that do try to paint a moral equivalence there are doing the bidding of Donald Trump.
So in the name
you don't buy that, do you?
well, we don't have enough time to go into it.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
Yeah, and look, in the name of ending on a positive note of agreement, because this is the big debate that people are going to have basically for the rest of all of our lives, especially if they were coming up with this. We want to end on the note of media, because obviously, let's talk about you for a second. Morning Joe is great. It was really innovative. It was an actual new way of approaching the news format, especially from a former politician. Today, something everyone is noticing is all the politicians, while they're in office, have podcasts. There's always sort of new channels coming up.
Right.
How do you think about this space? Because let's just pretend you'd left office in 2018, or you were still in office now. What would you be doing as someone who thought deeply about the media space? Because frankly, during quarantine, we watched a morning show, and then we read Brian Stelter's book that was the basis for a morning show. And he talked all about what you were doing to put together Morning Joe, and that was really funny.
It was
really
fascinating.
Cool. So,
yeah.
So what would you think about this space if you were starting straight right now?
You mean podcast space?
No. Let's say,
Podcasting is a media format, right? Because it's super easy and cheap to do this. We're doing this over Zoom. We're in different states. That's the sort of new thing versus cable, especially, mid 2000s. This wasn't the dynamic that anyone's sort of doing. So if you were starting out now, how would you think as sort of a creator and a politician in this space?
Well, I mean, I would do the same thing that I'm doing on Morning Joe, wherever I did it, which was, what I love the fact that you guys, know where I stand. I love the fact, all the mistakes I've made in the past, and we can talk about it. We can debate it. I think people like that. I think Morning Joe worked because when I got on, I could say, hey, I'm a Republican, and let me just really piss you off here. Just to really piss you off. And Meek and I would have the most heated arguments about enhanced interrogation techniques, also known as
torture.
Yeah, right.
No,
exactly.
I remember. Yeah,
right. And so we would have these horrible arguments, and I would say, well, isn't it just so convenient in 2007 that we can all sit back and be shocked and stunned and try to throw the guys in jail who were doing that in 2002 when Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein and I won't even name the rest of them because they're all my friends, which I'm sure you guys hate too. But Democrats and Republicans alike, we're like, yeah, what are you doing? Yeah, well, we're doing this and we're taking them. Then we go to the black side there. All right, great, fine, great, just do it. Is it working? Great. Can we do anything else? And then suddenly, like the Washington Post, Anna Priest breaks a story about black sites and all of this stuff into the program. They're like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. I'm like, fuck you. You knew what was going on all along. Don't act so shocked and stunned. But what worked is, without me saying the F word except once on Morning Joe, we could have that argument on Morning Joe. And it was usually really heated. Another thing, just to enrage your audience, when Michelle Obama said, when Barack Obama was doing well, this is the first time I've been proud.
I knew you were going to say that, by the way. I knew exactly what you were going to say.
Do you know why? Because Mika and I fought for 5 days over that. Like, we got off the show and we were still fighting. It was going on and on. So it was actually a lot of fun when George Bush was president and Barack Obama was president. But now that Donald Trump, past 4 years, we've agreed on just about everything. The world's coming to an end. Locusts are descending from the heavens. They're going to eat the flesh off of our bodies. It's like 5-alarm fire, which has become quite exhausting. But the one thing that everybody knows is, I just told them up front. People are like, you supported Donald. No, he didn't. I said from the very beginning, I was voting for Jeb Bush. And when Jeb Bush lost, I told people outright, okay, well, Bush is out of the race. So now I'm going to vote for John Kasich. I remember in 2012 telling people I wanted John Huntsman to win. I remember in 2008 telling people I wanted, Mitt Romney to win. See, I had really boring white guys.
See, but Joe, I know people have pushed you on this, but I just have to do it for the sake of the
Please
episode.
Please do it.
It's one thing.
You're going to do it. I can't wait. Come on, I'm ready.
Let's go.
It's one thing. Yeah, of course. Yeah, like you were going to vote for John Kasich and you wanted Jeb, but you platformed Donald Trump and you got excellent ratings and you were lauded as an innovator. And to your point, you made a lot of money doing it. So at the end of the day, how much does it matter that you didn't want to support Trump? That's just the argument about you platforming him when it was convenient.
So how do I do this without sounding defensive? So let's go. Let's walk through this. And I'll tell you, I'm going to walk through this and I want to ask all of your listeners to just be patient because I'm going to tell you how I really fucked up. Okay, are you ready? So we're going to walk through this. Are you sure I can swear on this?
You can.
Oh, you're all good, man.
Okay. Yeah. So here's the deal. First of all, people will say you helped Donald Trump in 2016 throughout 2016. It's false. In December of 2015, after he did the Muslim registry, I said, this is what Germany looked like in 1933. I could never vote for this man. I could never support this man. He's bad for the Republican Party. We confronted him, Vladimir Putin, in the middle of December of 2015. I'm sure you guys saw that part, that clip, because it's gotten a lot of play even years later.
Sure. I
hung up on him. We got into a shouting match. I hung up on him in the middle of 2015. Going into 2016, right before Super Tuesday, I said Donald Trump should be disqualified as president of the United States. It's disqualifying when he refused to condemn David Duke, refused to condemn the Klan, and I continued doing it. People, the guy was attacking me throughout 2016. I was attacking him. We had him on a lot. There's no doubt we had him on a lot. We also, though, I said it repeatedly, and I could find 30 times in the transcripts where he said, if you're running for office and you want to call in? Call in. We'll take your call anytime. Jeb wouldn't do it. Hillary wouldn't do it. We couldn't get Hillary on the show ever, despite the fact that when Hillary ran in 2008, we were her favorite stop. Like people joked, said, Hillary's your girlfriend. You're so nice to her. And we had a great, Hillary and I had a great working relationship. Not sure why she didn't call in. But, you know, Donald called in. Yeah, somebody said 99% of work is just showing up. That guy would show up. We asked other people to call in. Other people wouldn't call in. Do I wish we didn't have him on 30, 40 times? Well, you know what? If I were running Germany today from 1932 to 1934, yeah, I wouldn't want Hitler to be on 35 times. Looking back, I wish it hadn't happened. But it's not like prime time. You look at prime time and all the networks. And what they did was they would run Donald Trump's speech, but they wouldn't run Jeb's speeches. They wouldn't run Hillary's speeches. They wouldn't run Kasich's speeches, but they would run Trump's speeches at night. I don't think that's fair. In the morning, we gave everybody the same opportunity we gave Trump. And you can go through the transcripts, and we were harshly critical of the guy for throughout the overwhelming majority of 2016. But there were some times we said he was, you know, great at what he did, that he was a great political showman, that he was that he destroyed everybody on the debate stage, that he was dominant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you were watching, you knew we had a hostile relationship with him most of the year. Now, this is where he really screwed up. Looking back, where I think we made a terrible mistake was even though at the time we thought she was going to be president, so we focused on it more. The emails. We followed the New York Times stories on the Hillary emails, like everybody did. We stayed on her. I remember being critical of her after the UN press conference, saying she didn't do enough to put it behind her. Remember us being critical of the Clinton Foundation, how much money they made of the Clinton Foundation. I remember being critical of her for getting paid like $250,000 from Goldman Sachs, or getting paid $250,000 from New York State schools, going, man, if somebody from my old district asked me to go back and speak for a college, not only could I not charge them $250,000, I couldn't charge them at all because I had been working to, you know, but all of these things seem so small compared to what we've seen over the past 4 years with Donald Trump, and compared to what Donald Trump was doing in 2016 already. So I do think if I could rewind it, that's definitely something that I would do. You know, people always bring up, say, well, you know what, at one point, Donald Trump thanked Joe and Mika for their support. Well, guess what? I can't control what a madman does or says. He also thanked David Axelrod for his support. Thank you, David, for your support. And all he was doing was, thank you for saying that you thought that I could win. We've never supported him, and I've got tweets from him to prove it.
Yeah, it's honestly, this critique has always annoyed me. It's like you just said, and when a politician wants to call in on a news show, you take the call, especially a major presidential contender, and I just think it's so dumb. And frankly, I don't think you did anything wrong on Hillary either. I thought you were doing your job. I watched the show all throughout the time. The final question we have here is, we have a very young audience here. My own, frankly, career is made on young people hating cable news because that's where we are right now. So thank you.
I'm glad I can help you with that. And by the way, we're so mainstream. Morning show is now. They must really loathe me. How you guys doing?
There's a lot of people
here. Joe.
There's a lot of hate mail that we're going to get.
We are actually this. So Scott Galloway came on a few weeks ago. He said a lot of we got a lot of hate mail on that one. This will probably be our most hate mail episode. I love it.
And that's fine. I really don't give a shit. I would be very clear because I wanted to talk to you.
It's funny. John Heilman about 7 or 8 years ago said, "Hey, can you retweet something for me?" I go, "Yeah, but you don't really want me to." He goes, no, I really want you to. You got like a lot of followers here. I said, okay, you sure? Because I'm about to press the retweet button. And I did. And they're like, holy shit. You see, so the problem with me, as I explained to John, is I don't have a home base.
Yeah, that's true.
Like Republicans are like, well, you're a traitor. And Democrats are like, we don't want you on our side. So it's been sort of this, this Trump period has been a very interesting period. But can I just say something on that front really quickly, and then we'll get to the last question. This has been, there have been so many ways that the last 4 years have been heartbreaking for me as an American, but it has been so awesome to see who are the people that put their country first over politics. And it has been, for me, it's been one of the most exciting things that have happened for me to be on the same side with a lot of people who I had been opposing throughout most of my political career and public life, who had been on the other sides of issues on. It was great to be on the same side of people.
Like who? Like name names.
That love democracy. Well, people that were attacking me would be attacking me on Twitter, and
Sure.
I don't want to name names because I'm hoping we can still be friends after after this is all over. But also, there are also some Republicans who really irritated me. I won't say their names either, who I just didn't like. Okay, I'll give you an example. Charlie Sykes. I thought Charlie Sykes was way too close to Paul Ryan. And the populist in me, I as much as I liked Paul, I just never comfortable. Again, even though I understand this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but I spent my entire time in Washington fighting House leadership, fighting Republicans in the House leadership. And after Trump was elected, I saw that Charlie was one of the good ones. I was like, oh my God. Like, he was saying the same thing I was saying. He was going crazy about judicial independence. He was going crazy about Trump attacking the media as enemy of the people. And so that was really nice. And I could probably name 20, 30 other people like that. So that's been the upside of the past 4 years. But go ahead, ask me the question about cable news and hating cable news.
Well, it's more just, what do you think the biggest mistakes that cable made in the last 4 to 8 years, which has created, frankly, a tremendous market opportunity for people like Marshall and I?
Well, here's my problem. With answering your question, I watch 3 hours of cable news a day, and that's when I'm on cable news.
Yeah, right.
I'm not a big fan of cable news. In fact,
that's the morning Joe pitch, I guess, in terms of the pitches. It's not.
I just don't. And it's funny, when Mika and I got married, and I think the big shock, there's always a shock when you marry somebody. And I would walk in to the bedroom at 9 o'clock at night, and she would be watching cable news and looking at Twitter. And I would just look around, what the fuck? What's going on in here? No, I'm not going to hear them yelling. And you already know what they're going to say before they say it. No. But she loves cable news because, she grew up in news and that sort of thing. I'm on TV because I don't know why I'm on TV. I want to get my message out, but I don't really like being on TV. Mika loves TV. She loves the medium. So, but I mean, if I look at cable news, I think our message, I hope Morning Joe's message, despite the fact everybody that's listening now hates Morning Joe. Phil Griffin, who's the president of MSNBC, told me about a month ago, because you have one viewer, and it's Tim Russert. Everything you do, just know that Tim Russert is sitting watching. And you got to make sure that every question you ask, every segment you have, every guest you have on is something that Tim's not going to roll his eyes on. And we did that. And I remember our highest rated segment in 2007 was getting Walter Isaacson on, still asleep in bed, lying on his back, calling in on a telephone and talking about his book on Einstein.
Yeah.
And my producer was going, "This is killing us." Chris Lick was like, "This is killing us. This is killing us." So I did like 15 minutes, and it was obvious Walter's heart wasn't in it. He was half asleep, and he had never heard of the show. And I said, "Walter, listen, this has been so fascinating. Thank you so much." And he's like, "Got a break, got a break." I go, "Walter, I loved it so much. Can you stay on another 15 minutes?" He was like, "No." And so the next day, we got the ratings in, and it was not only the highest half hour of that day, it was the highest half hour of the year. So I've just seen a lot of dumbing down. I've seen network presidents focusing too much on how people looked instead of how people thought. I've seen prime time. Listen, if I know what you're going to say before you say it, I'm just not going to watch your show. Mm-hmm. And I just think there's a lot of tribalism going on, especially at night, and it makes me tired.
Certainly. And then one last Joe question. I also host a morning show, and I hate these hours. So what are your tips for having to
the nichest
talk
question
coherently?
Audience of one.
Yeah, this is literally only for me and my consumption. But what do I do, man? How do you talk cogently and then survive for the rest of the day?
Did you ever see Denzel Washington, movie where he was the pilot that flew the plane up?
Oh, yeah, Flight. Yeah, Flight.
Yeah. It was a great movie. Remember how he got ready for his... I'm joking, kids.
He's referencing cocaine and booze, to be clear. Yeah.
By the way, that's a hell of a movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
I'm a sucker for Denzel. I mean, Book of Eli. Oh my God! Don't even get me started on Book of Eli. But no, I'm really lucky. I'm a morning person. I'm not that much of a morning person, but I used to have a nighttime show on MSNBC, and doing a 10 o'clock show or a 9 o'clock show was a lot harder for me than doing a 6 to 9 show. But the main thing is you just got to get sleep. You just, you know what? Things got to slow down. I used to love daylight savings time when it was dark. I think I'm going to move to like New Brunswick. And I think I'm going to maybe move to Greenland where it gets dark at 3 in the afternoon. So everybody eats dinner at 4 and we're asleep by 5:30. Or maybe just move to Europe somewhere. Anyway, maybe I did. So I appreciate you guys having me, and I'm very intrigued by the fact that you succeed because we piss people off. This is like circle of life, right?
Well, so this is the fascinating. So the reason why we sort of discover this over time is that there's this weird narrative. So a couple of things here. One, everyone sort of thinks they hate the news, but they don't actually hate the news, right? Information's cool, personalities are cool at a fundamental level. Just like you said, politics is thousands of years old. This is hundreds of years old.
Yeah.
But if what you do is say this is news, but it's not like those cable people, that's what they love, because what they love is like the idea is of not being that. I mean, sorry, like, what's your articulation of that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's basically it. People love news. They like highly produced news. They like watching people in suits and all that. They just don't want to hear what they traditionally hear on cable. And the monopoly of cable on a certain type of politics and more just creates a nice big opportunity, right? For us. It's just
for you guys. So can I ask you guys a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Because I have a question. So who were your, I told you the people that got me in politics were Harry Truman, Bobby Kennedy, and Ronald Reagan, a sort of eclectic group. Who inspired you guys?
Yeah, fascinating for me. Mine is Caro, the Caro books, LBJ. So I'm from Texas, College Station, and grew up really, during the Iraq War. I was one of those like really annoying kids. I was watching, people like you and more, and I was like, screw Bush. I would get mad at you whenever you're defending torture. Yeah. That's my political ethos, kind of how I came up. And I really,
by the way, it's It's enhanced interrogation techniques.
Yes,
but go
right.
ahead.
Enhanced interrogation.
Yeah, Soccer.
Just
Let's watch
right.
the giggling
Yeah.
during the word torture, which happens so many times. I'm just like,
Yes.
I used to be a producer at PBS,
Yeah.
Joe, and I'm just sort of hearing this. I'm like, no, we're giggling as he says torture. But we'll move on and survive. Yeah, Soccer.
No, but anyway, but yeah, so
No, it was
the
LBJ
books, yeah.
It was the LBJ books. Really what it is, I came here, I was an intern on Capitol Hill, and I was 18 and went to GW. And I was like, this sucks, man. I was like, this is bullshit. Like, nobody here is actually interested in doing anything. Nobody here, I mean, the system and just so much of what, I mean, I ranted it to you, bipartisan consensus and all of that. And I just felt more and more as I stayed and as I kind of saw it, that we weren't accomplishing anything that people actually wanted. And so I just started talking about it, writing about it, critiquing it, and more. And hey, God bless the internet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Marshall, what about you?
Yeah, mine's a total set of cliches because it's sort of tough because there's only so many people in the 20th century to pick from. So RFK is huge for me. I'm from Oregon. I actually have a great poster of him in my room of running on the beach.
Where with the dog?
Yeah, with the dog. With
on the beach.
Freckle.
Right.
Yeah, the dog.
Right.
Yeah, it's
amazing with Freckle. Yeah.
It's a great poster. And so RFK and then Theodore Roosevelt. And this is just sort of the part that. And there seems like there's a bit of a TR resident, like there's a bit of like a TR renaissance, even on the right, because sort of if you think of like 90s and 2000s, Theodore Roosevelt, he's a big government Republican. Glenn Beck's sort of railing against him. Mm-hmm. But the part that gets young conservatives excited about TR is just how confident he was, how aggressive he was. If I were to sort of my critique of Obama's style of rhetoric is sort of the lack of confidence in it. And when he's sort of talking about his new book, which I'm sort of halfway through, he's sort of saying, was I too optimistic about American race relations? Was I too sort of forward looking? There's this sort of, in today's era, sounding unconfident sort of sounds smart. And we all feel the need to sort of say, well, I guess, Joe, you're saying that. But on the other hand, and I just like how confident he was. And I think that that's what we definitely need more of in the political system.
Yeah, I've got to say, at the end of the day, RFK actually, the end of the day, I can still read, and I go back and I reread Schlesinger and I reread other books about RFK. And there are times where when new books come out about RFK, I have to stop before June the 6th, 68, because it breaks my heart so much. I still, it's one of these things that was really before my time, but if you look at the arc of his life from 66 to 68, there's just extraordinary growth. And he was, for me, a leader like no other. It's funny, of course, LBJ, nobody hated Bobby more than LBJ.
Oh, yeah, they hated each other.
We have a clash. Yeah, they hated each other. We have a clash. And again, I think with Bobby, I mean, that's a good example. You talked about Bush. I'm not comparing Bobby to Bush at all. But, it's a good example with Bobby of people that hate Bobby love to throw all of his human failures at me and all the mistakes that he made. And yes, he made a lot of mistakes, but I prefer to look at what he did on April the 4th, 1968, when he went into Indianapolis, when everybody told him not to go into inner city Indianapolis, and cities across America burned that night.
Because MLK had just been assassinated.
Yeah.
Just for everybody's context, we'll put a link to that video in the show notes. It's one of the most incredible videos, like you said, speaking to an inner city audience, quoting like Greek poetry, if I recall.
He's quoting
he was like Aeschylus
from heart.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
there's nobody in America who could have done that. And it's just extraordinary. Yeah.
Talking about the awful grace of God. And yes, Bobby was involved in a lot of bad stuff. And yes, we have to recognize that. But at the same time, like a lot of leaders, there were extraordinary moments. And that's what I look to, not only to inspire me, but to try to inspire my children and other people as well. So, that would be a great link. And also his speech in Cape Town, actually 2 years to the day when he died, June the 6th. 1966, when he talked about few have the greatness to bend history itself, but it's when each of us cast a pebble onto the water from a million different sources of energy, and together the ripples, I don't have the exact words, but they build into a mighty tidal wave that they can knock down the greatest walls of oppression, et cetera. Just an extraordinary leader. It's interesting you say TR. TR was, for me at least, and I know after I said what I said about Bush, which, by the way, I can't wait for you to I can't wait. You'll have to forward some of the emails that people write about
I'm
that.
gonna send it your way.
But I always thought TR was a lot too militaristic for me.
So the key thing about my case there, it's not necessarily about his policies. It's more just about the energy. I'm not going to do like a Kennedy cliche and say vigor, but there's something there. There's something that, come on. I mean, you this is Morning Joe. Like you see these people. There's something just deeply terrible and boring about watching traditional politicians with the red tie and the blue tie. And there's just nothing there. There's sort of the dead-eyed look. And TR is just the entire opposite of that. And that's what's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, he's one of the only great presidents to not be forged in crisis. And their only reason is because of his sheer force of will, like the stories of him staying up at night, reading book and tearing out the pages. And his aides would come in and just see torn out magazine pages, and then having dinner after a full day and reciting a full German poetry, obscure thing to a guest while having just debated like Western expansionary policy. There is nobody else like him. So I agree.
By the way,
militarism.
Gets shot, finishes the speech.
Finishes the speech.
I mean, there's something Churchillian about him. You know, Churchill, who basically lived drunk for like 80 years of his life. I'm not sure how he did what he did, but yeah, there's something really, really inspiring about that as well. So.
Well, Joe, thank
Joe,
you. This has been.
By the way, let me just be clear. Not inspiring about living drunk for 80 years of your life, kids. Not inspiring at all.
Do not follow the flight morning routine. Don't be drunk. There's a set of bad career advice here.
Yeah, exactly. But I love this. I hope you guys will invite me back and we can go over some of the hate mail together.
Oh, 100%. You have an open invitation here on the Realignment. Joe, thank you so much for joining us, sir. We really appreciate it.
Can I say one more thing?
Please. It's your floor.
I just thought about it, and they're going to say, see, I hate him too because he won't shut up. But you had talked about how Washington was frustrating.
Yes.
It's boring. You see, that's the thing about Washington. Like Madison made it that way. He did. It's as Tom Ricks said in First Principles, which is a great book about the first four presidents and their education. That frustration, that's not a bug. That's the feature. Mm-hmm. It's tough. That's why we need to elect people to Washington who actually know how Washington works. That's why I'm hopeful that Joe Biden and some Republicans can get together and actually pass some meaningful legislation, not for the purpose of passing legislation, but I just think, you know what, it would be a nice thing for us to do, you know, for first time in 10 years to actually move the ball forward on healthcare, move the ball forward on immigration, move the ball forward on student loans, move the ball forward on a lot of issues.
Yeah, well, I do hope something happens. We'll see. Anyway, Joe, really appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much.